Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzhak Reuven speaking to you from just east of Jerusalem. Today is the 26th day of the month of Nisan 5782. It's April 26, 2022. Today is 11 days, which are 1 week and 4 days of the Omer. This coming Shabbat, we here in Israel read Parshat Kedoshim. Holy, be holy, you be holy, for I, HaShem, your God, am holy. Beginning with the book of Leviticus, chapter 19, verse 1, concluding chapter 20, verse 27. This coming Shabbat is Shabbat Mevarachin, meaning it's the Shabbat that we welcome in anticipation, the upcoming new month of Iyar, which actually begins Motzei Shabbat, which begins at the conclusion of Shabbat. It's a 2-day Rosh Chodesh, meaning Saturday night, Sunday, Sunday night, Monday. When it's a 2-day Rosh Chodesh, the first day of the Rosh Chodesh celebration is actually the final day of the concluding month. So Saturday night, Sunday is actually the 30th of Nisan, and Sunday night, Monday is actually the 1st of Iyar. Later in the week, I believe it's Tuesday night, Wednesday, is Yom HaZikaron, Israel Memorial Day, a very, very solemn and serious day here in Israel, followed immediately by Yom Atzma'ut, Israel Independence Day, which is a very happy and joy-filled day, a very sharp transition, a very jarring transition, but one that seems to work very beautifully. We'll talk about that more at length next week in Temple Talk, God willing. And before we get into Parashat Kedoshim, and let me explain that there's a discrepancy now for the next few weeks in the Parsha, in the Torah reading that we'll be reading here in Israel, and the Torah reading being read in synagogues on Shabbat in the diaspora. And that is because last week, Passover, the 7th day of Passover, was on Friday and went immediately into Shabbat. Passover ended it and we went into Shabbat. However, in the diaspora, a second day of all the holidays is celebrated. And so the 7th day of Passover, which is a holiday unto itself, was also celebrated in the diaspora on Saturday, actually on Shabbat, actually making it the 8th day of Passover. And so they read a special Passover reading in the synagogue on Shabbat / Passover 8th day, while we here in Israel had concluded Passover and had returned to the routine Torah reading. Not really a good word for any Torah reading. There's nothing routine about Torah readings, but went back to the normal schedule, and we read the Parsha of Acharei Mot, which in the diaspora, they'll just be reading this coming Shabbat. We'll be moving on to Kedoshim. We'll be talking more about Kedoshim in a few minutes. But I want to return to a subject that's been on my mind and been on a lot of people's minds and in our hearts, especially these past few weeks, and that is the Temple Mount. You may have noticed, if you follow us on Facebook, that we've been posting a lot of articles, a lot of videos about the Temple Mount. The reason, of course, is that the month of Ramadan has become, in the past 10 years, a tradition here in Israel that Muslims go up in huge numbers, and there are riots, and they stockpile rocks and bottle rockets, and throw them at in all directions, which compel the police to confront them, and then they throw them at the police, and you have pandemonium and chaos, and the police quell it. And then the Palestinians, the whole line that they've been using for over 100 years now is that Israel is endangering the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which has never happened once, but this is the line they use consistently. It works like magic. You say that and you get the rioters, you get people all worked up, and you get the entire Arab world worked up. And so Israel's been under a barrage of diplomatic confrontations. Jordan, for example, while encouraging vocally their prime minister in their parliament, praised the Palestinians for their violence, and then they complain to Israel that Israel responds by sending in the police. Anyway, There have actually been a lot of very, very good articles written in Israeli media and also abroad saying what's going on here. Like, why does Israel allow this to happen? Why do the Palestinians, why do the Muslims allow it to happen? The place is being trashed. And why are Israelis, Jews who want to go up to the Temple Mount and pray peacefully, why are they being punished by being told they can't go up? Because Israel has now banned all non-Muslims from the Temple Mount for the remainder, at least for the remainder of Ramadan, which is another week. And Israel, the latest is that, they'll let us know when we can go back up on the Temple Mount. During the 5 days that the Temple Mount was open for a total of maybe 20 hours to Jews during Passover, a record number of, I think, 4,265 Jews went up to the Temple Mount. Huge numbers. They went up peacefully, they prayed, and they left. No rioting, no boxing, no kicking a soccer ball in a mosque. This is what the Muslims are doing on the Temple Mount. This is what the rioters who are protesting, who are claiming the sanctity of Al-Aqsa, as they call the entire Temple Mount, is being sullied by Jewish presence. They go, they play soccer in the mosque. They trashed the mosque completely by throwing rocks out. So they shattered all the windows. They barricade the doors with all the furniture of the mosque. I saw a picture of a man trying to pray in the mosque. Yes, an elderly Muslim was trying to pray, and he had a chair propped up behind his head so that he wouldn't get hit by flying objects. We posted a video today of a couple of Muslims boxing outside the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount. If you've watched the videos on our Facebook page, I apologize on the one hand for being so obsessive about this, because, you've seen one video, you've seen them all, but the word really has to get out, and the evidence has to be out there. And these are the people who are totally desecrating the Temple Mount, the thing that they claim is so sacred, that is so holy. It's the third holiest site in Islam. And I imagine to many Muslims, it's the third holiest site in Islam, but to the people who are on the Temple Mount, the Muslims on the Temple Mount, don't give a damn about the sanctity of Al-Aqsa or the Temple Mount or anything else. They are there to cause violence. They are there to cause destruction. They're there to cause hatred. And it's engineered and manipulated by terrorist groups, including Hamas, including the Palestinian organization, and including the Jordanian-run Waqf, who incite and allow this to happen. And I have to say, also by the gracious approach of the Israeli government, which just allows it to happen. They don't bar any Muslim from going on the Temple Mount. We're so bent on expressing to the world how we grant religious freedom to all religions, that we allow everybody in the Temple Mount but Jews and non-Muslims, Gentiles. But any Muslim who is not suspected of being something other than a Muslim can go up, whether he's carrying rocks or in his pocket or bottle rockets, Molotov cocktails. It doesn't matter. In past years, sometimes they've banned people under 30 because those are the people who are rioting. They're not doing this now because it's so important for Israel to say to the world, we are not preventing Muslims from praying. But we are preventing Muslims from praying. But Muslims that want to pray can't pray in peace because of the terrorists who have taken over the Temple Mount. Flags, Hamas flags in the Temple Mount. It's just disgusting what's going on. And again, I'm talking about it and talking about it and talking about it. And I apologize if you really want to hear more Torah-oriented things and things about the Mikdash. But it's just, I feel that the word has to get out there. And it's just sick what's going on. And on the bright side, again, the number of Jews going up to the Temple Mount is just skyrocketing. And of course, it's nowhere near the amount of Muslims on the Temple Mount, but it's growing. It's growing consistently, and surprising even the activists who are 24 hours, 6 days a week are busy engaging people and promoting the Temple Mount and encouraging people to come up and helping people to come up and navigate their way. The numbers are fantastic, and more Israeli politicians are saying, Jews need to have the right to pray. There's this thing called the status quo in the Temple Mount, which was established very nonchalantly right after Israel liberated the Temple Mount in 1967, which gave the keys back to the Muslim Waqf to basically to run the Muslim affairs in the Temple Mount. But Israel has allowed the Muslim Waqf to run the entire Temple Mount, and to run Jews off the Temple Mount. And Israel always claims we're keeping by the status quo. The status quo is not a static status quo. Status quo doesn't allow for Muslims to riot. It doesn't allow for Muslims to destroy archaeological artifacts in the Temple Mount. It doesn't allow Muslims to build mosques and turn buildings into mosques all the time, or trash the Temple Mount, or kick a soccer ball around the Temple Mount, or have boxing matches around the Temple Mount. It doesn't allow. That's not the status quo. And the status quo has been broken 1,000 times over, and Israel claims with this pathetic claim, we're keeping to the status quo, which means no Jews can pray in the Temple Mount. Our government officials still claim that no Jews pray in the Temple Mount when everybody knows that Jews are praying in the Temple Mount now. So it's a big lie. It's a big lie. Lose it already. Change the status quo. You know what? The Muslims are afraid that Israel will do what Israel did in the Machpelah cave in Hebron, which was divided it by area and by time. When Jews can pray, when Muslims can pray. Which areas Jews can pray in, which area Muslims can pray in. They're afraid that Israel will do the same thing in the Temple Mount. Israel needs to do the same thing in the Temple Mount. That's the first step. Certainly not the last step. That's the first step. Yes, Jews have every right in the world. It's the holiest place in the world for Jews and for Christians. It's a holy place. And all these people have the right, the God-given right, and the legal right, the inalienable right to be able to pray in this place freely and to have free access, not limited access. You know, Israel's accused day and night, left and right, of being an apartheid state, which is insane. But there is one case of apartheid in Israel, and that is the banning of Jews from the Temple Mount, the banning of Jewish prayer from the Temple Mount. Yes, we've made inroads, and it's getting better. But still, until there is a clear change of policy, and let the Arabs know, let the Muslims know, nobody's kicking the Muslims off the Temple Mount. Nobody's endangering Al-Aqsa Mosque. Let them know. It's a time, the change has come. We've made peace with a bunch of Arab nations. Okay, I think we can move forward here. Reading a book, fascinating book, which I've talked about in the past, and I'm about finished with it. A book called Habayit, which means the house. Har Habayit is the name of the Hebrew name for the Temple Mount, meaning the house, the mountain of the house, and the Bayit is the Beit HaBechira, the chosen house, the Beit HaMikdash, the holy temple. Book by Arnon Segal, who is a journalist and an activist, goes up to the Temple Mount, I think every day. He lives in the city of David, right nearby. And he wrote this fascinating book, so well researched, about the history of the Temple Mount artifact, or the archaeological artifacts in the Temple Mount, and the history in the Temple Mount. And he points out that many, many, many years over the past 2,000, many, many centuries, Jews have had access to the Temple Mount. There have been times when Jews have had a Beit Knesset, a synagogue in the Temple Mount. There have been times when there's good reason to believe, there's a lot of evidence that for short periods of time, the Jews had been given a green light to build the Mikdash, to build a temple. And there might have been a time when a temple was built and running for a few years on the Temple Mount over these past 2 millennia since the temple was destroyed. And only in more recent times was there a ban, like really in the 19th century. The Ottomans weren't letting anybody up onto the Temple Mount, Jew or Gentile. And the British, when they took over, adopted that policy. And Israel, when they took over, for some insane reason, adopted that policy. It's not a policy written in stone. It's not even a historical policy. It's a modern policy that has no historical precedent. And unfortunately, when Israel was victorious in the 67 war and had control of the Temple Mount, Israel's very secular government at the time wanted nothing to do with the Temple Mount. It was a big headache for them, as they perceived it. And the religious establishment, other than the chief rabbi of the Israeli army, Shlomo Goren, who was an advocate from the very start for Jewish presence on the Temple Mount for prayer, and he was conducting prayer sessions on the Temple Mount, and he had moved into one of the buildings there and had a study, a big midrash, a place of study on the Temple Mount where army officers were coming to study for the first month or so after Israel liberated the Temple Mount. And he had plans, but the political establishment plus the rest of the religious establishment crushed his plans and forced him off the Temple Mount, and that was that. So, we talk about Passover night, right? Mentioned this last week, this concept that Israel was freed from Egypt by God's loving kindness. That Israel was submerged in these 49 layers of impurity, and it would take 49 days of Israel out of Egypt to shed off all these layers of impurity and be ready and pure by the 50th day to receive the Torah at Mount Sinai. And that's the process that we go through every year as we count the Omer, Sfirat Omer. But, Israel was sort of, boom, free. But we didn't have in mystical terms, we say the mochin, we didn't have the spiritual capabilities yet to really take it all in and understand it and absorb it and work with it. We had to work our way up. We're newly freed people. And the fact of the matter is that Israel had a tremendous miracle, a tremendous gift given to them in the Six-Day War. That was, of course, Judea and Samaria, Jerusalem, and the Temple Mount. And Israel wasn't ready for it, it turns out. Spiritually, Israel wasn't ready to handle it. And Israel fumbled it. And so now, all these many years later, Israel is working. Elements in Israel who are growing stronger and stronger and more every day are working in order to correct that situation and to shed all those layers of impurity that gave us some kind of delusional illusion that the Temple Mount was no longer the heart and soul, the beating heart and soul of the nation of Israel. For some reason, having been kept away from it for so long, people thought it was no longer important. And certainly the government at the time and has continued to work in order to erase the Temple Mount from the people's consciousness, but it won't be erased. And one of the reasons that's not erased, I guess we can thank the Muslims for their rioting and their attitude of exclusivity and superiority. They make it that we never forget. And maybe that's a punishment for the very poor attitude that Israel has had toward the Temple Mount over the past 50 years. But again, the good news is that that's changing day by day. Like I say, there are elements, that doesn't sound too good. There are wonderful people who are working on it every day, bringing people up to the Temple Mount, encouraging people to go up. I mentioned Arnon Segal before in that wonderful book. Unfortunately, the book is in Hebrew. I mean, that's not unfortunate, but for people who don't understand Hebrew, there's no translation. I really hope that it gets translated because it's beautifully written, it's beautifully researched, and it's such an eye-opener, and everybody should really have access to all that information. Going on to Parshat Kedoshim, again, beginning Leviticus chapter 19, verse 1, and it concludes chapter 20, 27. I'm going to read the first couple of verses in Hebrew, then in English. HaShem, Vayedaber HaShem el Moshe lemor, deber el bnei, I'm going to start again. Vayedaber HaShem el Moshe lemor, deber el kol adat bnei Yisrael, va'amarta alehem, Kedoshim tiyu ki kadosh ani HaShem Elohechem. Ish imo v'aviv tira'u, v'et shabtotai tishmoru, ani HaShem Elohechem. Al tifnu el ha'elilim ve'elohei masecha, lo ta'asu lachem, ani HaShem Elohechem. V'chi tizbachu zevach shlamim l'Hashem, liratzonechem tizbachuhu. Okay. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to the entire assembly of the children of Israel and say to them, you shall be holy, Kedoshim, for holy am I, for Kadosh ani, holy am I, Hashem, your God, every man Your mother and father shall you revere, and my Sabbaths shall you observe. I am HaShem your God. Do not turn to the idols, and molten gods shall you not make for yourselves. I am HaShem your God. When you slaughter a peace offering to HaShem, you shall slaughter it in favor, to find favor for yourselves. On the day of your slaughter shall it be eaten. On the next day, or whatever remains in the third day, shall be burned in fire. Okay, etc., etc. There is a repeating refrain in many of these verses in Parshat Kedoshim, and that is, you shall be holy, for I am HaShem, your God, am holy. You shall be holy, for I, HaShem, your God, am holy. And what does it mean to be holy? What does it mean to be holy? And you know, we're created in God's image. So yeah, I guess if God's holy, we should strive to be holy ourselves. That's why we're created in God's image. The word holy, kadosh, in Hebrew, really the roots meaning of the word is to be separate, to be separated from, to, I would say, distinguish yourself, to make yourself unique. And how do you make yourself unique according to the Torah? By being holy, by doing what HaShem tells us to do, by walking in the way of HaShem. And that become unique as a nation, and we also become unique as individuals. And this is a fascinating concept. You know, we've learned in the West these past decades that, you know, you got to do your own thing. You got to be your own person. You know, you have to be different from everybody else. You know, you have to find the real you. Well, that's all true. But how do you find the real you? And how do you be different? Not to conform. In the 60s, that was the big thing. You don't conform. And in the 60s, there was a lot of nonconformity. A lot of people were sort of doing their own thing. But as soon as their own thing became a popular thing, then everybody started doing their own thing in the same way. And today, with social media and with all the social pressures that puts on people, it seems that everybody wants to be like everybody else. Everybody wants to fit the same template. Everybody wants to look the same. Everybody wants to see the same. Now, of course, there are different sides to all these things. So there are a lot of people that want to be just like this one, and a lot of people that be just like this one. But if you're chasing after somebody else's image, and that's really what you're doing, if you want to look a certain way because someone who's famous and popular looks that way, you're basically chasing after their image. You're basically making an idol of somebody. You're practicing idolatry. And you're never going to be unique. You're never going to be holy. You're always going to be a poor imitation of someone else. And that's sad. And that's lonely. And that's the opposite of holy. So how do you be holy? You have to spend your whole life searching for something that nobody else is doing? No. The Torah tells us, be holy by simply doing what HaShem asks you to do. There's your holiness. That's what it's all about. And of course, the peak, the height of all these verses is the one that says, love your neighbor as yourself. I am HaShem, your God. And there's 3 components in this. And one is love your neighbor as yourself. Yeah, work that out. Love your neighbor. Love your neighbor. People say, how do you do that? That's not so easy. And then as yourself. Well, do you love yourself? You can't love your neighbor as yourself if you don't love yourself. And then how do we work that out? And then God gives us the answer. I am HaShem. I created you. You've been created in my image, you and your neighbor. That's what that thread that you have in common, that's what makes you unique, each in your own way, because people are individuals. God created each one different from the other. That's why he created each one of us. God doesn't need to have multiples of the same thing in his world. Each one of us is a unique individual, but we achieve and we realize your uniqueness by following the ways of HaShem. It's a fascinating commandment. How can we be commanded to love? But we're commanded to love HaShem. What's that all about? But to love someone is to accept that person, accept that they're outside of you. They are not you. But what you have in common, you have HaShem in common. But you each have a spark of HaShem in you. What was I going to say? Another interesting aspect of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha is how we say it in Hebrew. Love your neighbor as yourself. Re'acha is your friend, your neighbor. It's usually translated as neighbor, but it means a friend. In Hebrew, modern Hebrew, ra'iyati, I would say my wife. It's a word. It's not the word for my wife, but it's my partner, my friend, ra'iyati. It's a friend. But resh ayin, that in itself means bad, evil, right? You do something ra, you do something bad, it's evil, it's not good. So some of our sages have interpreted it as love the bad and accept the bad, I guess. Love people even though they're not perfect, even though there's bad in them. And how do you do that? You have to accept that you're not perfect as well. Of course, we always want to improve and we want to get better. But we can only continue our work on ourselves if we accept where we are at the moment. And we can't correct things unless we accept where they've gone awry. So, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, ani HaShem. It's a beautiful, fascinating commandment, and it's something that we say every morning before we begin our tefillah, before we begin our prayer. We say, I take it upon myself to fulfill the mitzvah, the commandment of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, to love your neighbor as yourself. Because why would God listen to our prayers if we can't accept other people? We don't have God's ear exclusively. We can't claim exclusivity. And if God can accept us, and we can, and we have the audacity to speak to God directly, then certainly we should be able to accept others. And a lot of that is being non-judgmental. Just nobody's perfect. This is a very difficult thing. Not an easy commandment. And it's one that it bears repeating every day, to say and remind ourselves each day before we start our day that it's a top commandment. Rabbi Akiva said it's the most important. It's the whole Torah in one word, and one commandment. That's the whole thing. Because if you can do that, everything else will come to you. It's important, because if you can love your neighbor as yourself, it means you can love HaShem. If you can love your neighbor as yourself, it means you can relate to HaShem. You can relate to your neighbor. You see the beauty of fulfilling the mitzvot. Because what do the mitzvot do? They tie us, they bind us to one another, and they bind us to HaShem. They're connectors. And so we have this two different things here, which may seem like opposite, but they're the same. One is be holy, be kadosh, separate, right? Be unique, be your own person. But the other is attach yourself to others. Be part of the world at large. Don't hold yourself aloof. There's a very important saying in Hebrew, Al tifros min hasibor. Don't hold yourself aloof from the public. You have to be part of the public. You have to be part of the people. But at the same time, that doesn't prevent you from being your own person, a unique person. And again, the more you connect yourself to others, the more you work on behalf of others, the more you put others their needs first and foremost, the more unique you'll become, the more of an individual you'll become. You'll feel it. You'll realize it. Being an individual, again, is not about chasing after someone else's notion of what it takes to be this or to be that. And if you're looking for a guide, looking for how to be an individual, a holy person, a unique person, the Torah's right there before you. And yes, it's a rule book that applies to all of us, but with the understanding that it all applies to each and every one of us a little bit differently. And we see it a little bit differently. There's a tradition that every person has their own Torah. That every person, yes, we share the same Torah, but every person understands it a little bit differently. Every person approaches it a little bit differently. There's no one way to approach it. The one way is your way. And it's a lifetime of work to realize your own Torah and to create your own relationship with HaShem and your own relationship with the Torah itself and your own relationship with other people. So, again, being holy and I'm HaShem, these are two phrases that come up again and again, and it's a constant reminder. Be holy. Don't let up. And why shouldn't you let up? Because I'm HaShem, I'm here. You know what? You can take any verse and add to it, I'm HaShem, your God. I'm here, right? I didn't go away. I didn't go anywhere. I'm here. I was here before and I'll be here after. And when God fills that presence in your life, then yeah, you live your life differently and you're not alone. And God, above all, appreciates who you are. That's why God created you, to be who you are. You have to be your person. Oh, there's a famous story about a famous rabbi who died and went to heaven, and he was lamenting. I'm sure I'm not getting the story right, that he didn't get it right, and the angel told him, all you need to do is be yourself in life. Just be who you are. Figure it out. Everybody was born unique, with a unique task, with a unique mission in life. And our life's task is to figure it out and to pursue it and to strive to fulfill it. Can I tell you what your life's task is, what your mission is? No. I think every person has to figure it out for themselves, and that's not an easy thing. And it's a lifetime of work and digging in deeper and revealing more of who you are. There is a few verses in this week's Parsha, chapter 20, verse 1. HaShem spoke to Moshe, saying, say to the children of Israel, any man from the children of Israel and from the proselyte who lives with Israel, who shall give of his seed to Molech, shall be put to death. The people of the land shall pelt him with stones. I shall concentrate my attention upon that man, and I shall cut him off from among his people, for he has given from his offspring to Molech, in order to defile my sanctuary and to desecrate my holy name. And it goes on and on. There is no punishment too great, and God's knows no anger, but the anger of a person who brings his child to Molech. What was Molech? Molech was his idol that demanded the sacrifice by burning of a person's child. It was a horrible, horrible idolatrous practice that apparently had a grip on people, and it was not a simple thing to eradicate. And even in times of, when Israel was in the land, they had the Torah, and they had the Mikdash. There are people who would throw their child into the fire of Molech, and there's nothing more horrific and anti-holy than that. And I think that's why it appears in this week's reading, because it is so antithetical and so horrific, so antithetical to the concept, the reality of holiness, the presence of HaShem in every aspect of our lives. Honey HaShem, HaShem, I'm here. Thank you so much for being with me. Temple Talk.